It's late at night, the room is quiet, your body is tired, and you've finally settled into bed. But instead of drifting into sleep, your mind begins another conversation. You replay something you said earlier in the day, wondering if it came across the wrong way. Then your thoughts jump to tomorrow's meeting, next month's bills, or a decision you haven't made yet. Before long, one question becomes 10. Every possibility branches into another, and your mind is racing through futures that haven't happened while refusing to let go of a past that cannot be changed. D. If you've ever experienced this, you know how exhausting overthinking can be. Many people believe that overthinking is simply a sign of being intelligent, responsible, or prepared. They assume that analyzing every detail means they're avoiding mistakes and staying in control. After all, isn't it better to think too much than not enough? Not necessarily. There is a profound difference between thoughtful reflection and endless mental repetition. Healthy thinking leads to insight, clarity, and action. Overthinking creates confusion, hesitation, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. It convinces you that one more hour of analysis will finally bring certainty, when in reality it often leads to even greater uncertainty. This audiobook is not about telling you to stop thinking or to force yourself into constant positivity. Thinking is one of your mind's greatest strengths. The problem begins when your thoughts stop serving you and start controlling you. Overthinking isn't a personality trait you're born with or a permanent part of who you are. It's a psychological pattern, and patterns can be understood, interrupted, and changed. Throughout this audiobook, you'll explore the hidden psychology behind mental loops, uncertainty, fear, perfectionism, and the illusion of control. You'll discover why your brain clings to unanswered questions, why anxiety fuels repetitive thinking, and why chasing absolute certainty often keeps you trapped in indecision. More importantly, you'll learn practical ways to break these cycles by changing not only your habits of thought, but also the identity that sustains them. By the end of this journey, your goal won't be to eliminate every anxious thought. Instead, you'll become the kind of person who can observe uncertainty without being overwhelmed by it, make decisions without endless rumination, and find peace without needing perfect control. Because the quietest mind isn't the one that never thinks. It's the one that knows which thoughts deserve its attention. And that transformation begins here. Chapter 1. Why Your Mind Never Stops. Emma had a routine she never planned. Every evening, after finishing work, responding to messages, and finally climbing into bed, she expected her day to end. Instead, it seemed to begin all over again. The presentation she gave that afternoon replayed in her mind. She remembered a brief pause while answering a question. Did everyone notice? She thought about a joke she made during lunch. Was it awkward? She reread a text message she had sent hours earlier, wondering whether it sounded too cold, too eager, or simply strange. By midnight, she had mentally reconstructed conversations that everyone else had probably forgotten. By 1 in the morning, she was imagining future conversations, preparing answers to questions that had never been asked. When the alarm rang the next morning, Emma was exhausted, not because she had been physically active, but because her mind had worked overtime. If you've ever experienced something similar, you may have wondered why your brain refuses to switch off. Why does it seem easier to replay mistakes than remember successes? Why do small worries grow into enormous concerns the moment life becomes quiet? The answer begins with understanding an important truth about the human brain. Your brain was never designed to make you feel peaceful. It was designed to keep you alive. For most of human history, survival depended on noticing danger before it noticed you. Our ancestors lived in environments where overlooking a single threat could have deadly consequences. A rustling sound in the bushes might have been the wind, or it might have been a predator. The person who assumed everything was fine sometimes didn't survive long enough to pass on that optimism. The person who stayed alert, questioned unfamiliar situations, and anticipated danger had a better chance of living another day. Over thousands of generations, the human brain became remarkably efficient at detecting problems. That ancient survival system still exists inside every one of us. The world around us has changed dramatically, but our brains have not evolved at the same pace. Most people no longer spend their days avoiding wild animals or searching for food, yet the threat detection system remains active. Instead of looking for physical danger, it now scans for emotional, social, and psychological threats. Will people reject me? What if I lose my job? Did I embarrass myself? What if I make the wrong decision? The brain treats many of these questions with surprising seriousness because from an evolutionary perspective, belonging to a group was essential for survival. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your community could mean isolation, vulnerability, or even death. Today, an awkward conversation at work carries no such consequences, but your brain doesn't always recognize the difference. To your ancient survival system, social discomfort still feels like danger. This explains one of psychology's most fascinating tendencies, negativity bias. Negativity bias is the brain's natural tendency to notice, remember, and focus on negative experiences more than positive ones. It's why one critical comment can overshadow 10 compliments. It's why embarrassing moments stay vivid for years, while countless pleasant memories quietly fade into the background. Imagine attending a meeting where 9 people praise your work and 1 person offers mild criticism. Which comment stays with you during the drive home? For most people, it's the criticism, not because it was more accurate, because your brain automatically labels potential problems as more important than pleasant experiences. Emma experienced this every day. She could receive positive feedback from her manager, appreciation from clients, and encouragement from co-workers. Yet the moment one colleague looked distracted during her presentation, her mind became convinced she had done something wrong. She wasn't choosing to focus on the negative. Her brain was doing exactly what it had evolved to do. Search for threats, analyze them, prevent them from happening again. The problem is that the modern mind often struggles to distinguish between useful thinking and endless thinking. Useful thinking has a purpose. It identifies a problem, searches for a solution, and eventually reaches a conclusion. Overthinking follows a different pattern. It circles the same questions repeatedly without creating clarity. Instead of solving the problem, it keeps the problem emotionally alive. Imagine a smoke detector that works perfectly during a real fire. Now imagine that same smoke detector going off every time someone makes toast. The system isn't broken, it's overly sensitive. Overthinking works much the same way. Your brain isn't malfunctioning, it's reacting to situations that feel dangerous even when they are not. Every unanswered email becomes a possible rejection. Every delayed response becomes evidence that someone is upset. Every uncertain decision becomes an opportunity for catastrophic predictions. This constant scanning creates the illusion that thinking more will eventually produce certainty. Unfortunately, certainty is something life rarely offers. The more your brain searches for absolute reassurance, the more possibilities it discovers. Each answer creates another question. Each solution reveals another potential problem. The loop continues. This is why many chronic overthinkers describe feeling mentally trapped. They aren't lacking intelligence. In fact, many are highly thoughtful, conscientious, and observant people. Their minds are simply applying problem-solving abilities to situations that cannot be solved through endless analysis. Emma slowly began recognizing this pattern. One evening, after replaying the same conversation for nearly an hour, she paused and asked herself a simple question. If someone else had said exactly what I said today, would I spend an hour analyzing it? The answer was immediate. Of course not. She would probably reassure them that everyone makes small mistakes and that most people were too focused on their own lives to remember every word. That realization was uncomfortable. She had been offering others kindness while offering herself endless scrutiny. For the first time, Emma understood that her thoughts were not always objective observations. They were protective predictions generated by a brain that believed constant vigilance was the safest strategy. That awareness didn't silence her mind overnight, but it changed her relationship with it. Instead of believing every anxious thought, she began seeing those thoughts as signals from an ancient survival system doing its best to protect her. Some signals deserved attention, many did not. This distinction marked the beginning of real change. Because when you understand that your mind is naturally wired to search for danger, you stop blaming yourself for having anxious thoughts. You begin recognizing that thoughts are automatic. Your response to them is a choice. That single insight creates space between you and your mental loops. It reminds you that you are not your thoughts. You are the person observing them. And once you realize your brain is designed to search constantly for potential threats, another question naturally emerges. If these thoughts are only trying to protect you, why do some of them refuse to leave? Chapter 2. The Trap of Mental Loops. A single thought enters your mind. It seems harmless at first. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. A few minutes later, the thought returns. This time, it brings another question. What if they misunderstood me? Soon, you're replaying the conversation from every possible angle, searching for the exact moment something might have gone wrong. You imagine different responses, different outcomes, different versions of yourself. Hours pass, yet nothing has changed except your level of exhaustion. The conversation is over. The moment is gone. But your mind refuses to let it stay in the past. This is the invisible trap of mental loops. Unlike productive thinking, which moves toward understanding and action, mental loops move in circles. They create the feeling of making progress while quietly keeping you trapped in the very problem you're trying to solve. That is why overthinking can be so convincing. It feels like work. It feels responsible. It feels as though you're preventing future mistakes. In reality, your mind is often repeating the same emotional experience without producing a new solution. Psychologists call this pattern rumination. Rumination is the tendency to think about the same distressing event, emotion, or problem repeatedly without moving toward resolution. Instead of asking, "What can I learn?" the mind keeps asking, "Why did this happen?" or "What if I had done something differently?" The questions change slightly. The emotional experience remains the same. Rumination creates an illusion of control. It convinces you that if you replay the event enough times, you'll finally discover the perfect explanation or the perfect response. But emotional wounds rarely heal through endless analysis. They heal through understanding, acceptance, and eventually letting go. Ryan learned this lesson the hard way. After months of preparing for what he believed was the opportunity of a lifetime, he finally landed an interview with a company he had dreamed of joining. The interview seemed to go well. The hiring manager smiled. The conversation flowed naturally. Ryan left the building feeling hopeful. 3 days later, an email arrived. The company had decided to move forward with another candidate. The rejection hurt. That was understandable. What surprised Ryan was what happened afterward. For weeks, his mind replayed the interview almost every evening. He remembered a question that had caught him off guard. He wondered whether he had spoken too quickly. He questioned his handshake, his posture, his final answer, even the clothes he had chosen to wear. Each replay felt slightly different. Each replay promised clarity. None of them delivered it. His brain had become trapped inside a cognitive loop. A cognitive loop forms when the mind repeatedly cycles through the same thoughts because it believes something important remains unresolved. Instead of filing the experience away as complete, the brain keeps reopening it, searching for certainty that no longer exists. Imagine reading a mystery novel with the final chapter missing. You would naturally keep wondering how the story ends. Your mind dislikes unfinished narratives. This tendency helps explain another fascinating psychological principle known as the Zeigarnik effect. The Zeigarnik effect describes the brain's tendency to remember unfinished tasks and unresolved experiences more vividly than completed ones. An unanswered message lingers in your thoughts. A project left unfinished keeps returning to your attention. An unresolved argument quietly occupies mental space. The brain continues pulling your awareness back because, from its perspective, the story isn't over. Ryan's interview had become exactly that, an unfinished story. He never learned precisely why he wasn't chosen. Perhaps another candidate had more experience. Perhaps the company changed direction. Perhaps the decision had little to do with his performance at all. His brain disliked those unanswered possibilities, so it created its own assignment: keep analyzing until certainty is found. The problem was that certainty didn't exist. No amount of replaying could reveal information Ryan simply didn't have. Yet his mind continued searching anyway. Another important part of the brain contributes to this experience. Neuroscientists refer to it as the default mode network, often shortened to the DMN. The default mode network becomes active when your attention isn't focused on an external task. It's the network responsible for daydreaming, remembering the past, imagining the future, and reflecting on yourself. In many ways, it is one of the brain's greatest gifts. It allows creativity, planning, self-reflection, learning from experience. But when combined with anxiety, it can become the perfect environment for overthinking. The moment external distractions disappear during a quiet drive, a shower, or just before sleep, the default mode network begins connecting memories, emotions, and possibilities. Without realizing it, your mind starts revisiting old conversations, anticipating future problems, and constructing endless what-if scenarios. This is why overthinking often becomes louder at night. The world becomes quiet. The brain becomes active. Emma had experienced this in the previous chapter. Ryan experienced it after his interview. Perhaps you've experienced it yourself. The important realization is this: the presence of repeated thoughts does not mean those thoughts are important. The brain repeats many things simply because they remain emotionally unresolved, not because they deserve unlimited attention. Ryan slowly began changing his approach. Instead of asking, "How can I stop thinking about the interview?" he asked a different question. Is this thought helping me move forward, or is it simply repeating itself? At first, the answer was uncomfortable. Most of his thinking wasn't productive. It was familiar. He wasn't solving the interview anymore. He was reliving it. Once he recognized that pattern, he tried something different. Each time the memory returned, he acknowledged it without beginning another investigation. He reminded himself that the interview belonged to the past, even if his brain wanted to reopen the file. Gradually, something remarkable happened. The thought still appeared, but it stayed for less time. Without constant attention, the loop slowly lost its strength. This reveals an important truth about the mind. Thoughts grow stronger when they are constantly fed with attention. Not every thought deserves analysis. Not every memory requires another review. Not every unanswered question can be answered. Sometimes the healthiest response is not finding a better explanation. It is allowing uncertainty to exist without demanding immediate resolution. That doesn't mean ignoring valuable lessons. Ryan still reflected on ways to improve his interview skills. He practiced communicating more clearly. He prepared more effectively for future opportunities. But once the learning was complete, he stopped confusing growth with endless replay. That distinction gave his mind permission to move forward. Because healing doesn't come from thinking about the same event forever. It comes from knowing when enough thinking has already happened. Yet, unfinished experiences are only one reason the mind becomes trapped in repetitive thought. There is another force that fuels overthinking even more powerfully. Not the past, but the future. Because repetitive thinking isn't driven only by unfinished events. It is also fueled by uncertainty. Chapter 3. Why uncertainty feels so dangerous. Imagine standing at a crossroads with two paths in front of you. One path is difficult, but you know exactly where it leads. The other might lead to something wonderful, or it might lead nowhere at all. Which path feels more uncomfortable? For many people, the uncertainty of the second option creates more anxiety than the certainty of the first, even if the first guarantees disappointment. That reaction may seem irrational. Why would the unknown feel more threatening than something we already know is unpleasant? The answer lies deep within the way the human brain has evolved. Your brain is, above all else, a prediction machine. Every moment of every day, it quietly tries to anticipate what will happen next. It predicts where people will walk, how conversations will unfold, what familiar routines will feel like, and whether the environment around you is safe. These predictions allow you to move through life efficiently without consciously analyzing every detail. Most of the time, this system works remarkably well. The problem begins when life presents situations that cannot be predicted. An unanswered message, a medical test result, a job application, a relationship that feels uncertain, a decision with no obvious right answer. When the brain cannot confidently predict what comes next, it often interprets uncertainty as danger. Not because uncertainty is inherently dangerous, because uncertainty removes the brain's sense of control. This explains why overthinking often feels so irresistible. The mind believes that if it thinks long enough, it will eventually eliminate uncertainty. One more scenario, one more possibility, one more hour of analysis. Surely then, everything will become clear. Unfortunately, life rarely offers that kind of certainty. Sophia knew this pattern better than anyone. Even small decisions felt surprisingly overwhelming. Choosing whether to accept a weekend invitation became a lengthy internal debate. Should she go? What if she felt awkward? What if she stayed home and missed an important opportunity? If she accepted, what should she wear? Would people judge her? Would she regret saying yes? Would she regret saying no? A simple decision that might take someone else 2 minutes often occupied her mind for hours. Larger decisions became even more exhausting. Changing jobs, moving to a new apartment, starting a new relationship. Each possibility branched into dozens of imagined futures. Instead of helping her make better choices, all that thinking left her frozen. She wasn't making fewer mistakes, she was making fewer decisions. Psychologists describe this pattern as intolerance of uncertainty. People with a high intolerance of uncertainty find it especially difficult to tolerate situations where outcomes are unknown. They often feel compelled to gather more information, imagine every possible scenario, or postpone decisions until they feel completely certain. The difficulty is that complete certainty almost never arrives. There is always another possibility to consider, another risk to imagine, another question to answer. The search becomes endless. Anxiety quietly fuels this cycle. Many people believe anxiety is simply excessive fear. In reality, anxiety is often the brain's attempt to prepare for uncertain futures before they happen. It asks questions like, what if something goes wrong? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm not prepared? These questions feel responsible. After all, planning is useful. Preparation is valuable. The problem arises when preparation turns into endless prediction. The anxious mind begins treating every imagined possibility as though it deserves equal attention. It prepares for conversations that never happen, problems that never appear, failures that never occur. Instead of protecting you, anxiety begins exhausting you. Another fascinating psychological process contributes to this experience. It is known as prediction error. Every prediction your brain makes is essentially a guess. When reality matches that guess, the brain feels comfortable. When reality differs from its expectation, the brain experiences surprise and immediately tries to update its understanding of the world. This ability is incredibly useful. It helps us learn, adapt, grow. But people who overthink often try to eliminate prediction errors completely. They want to anticipate every outcome before taking action. They believe that if they think hard enough, life will stop surprising them. It never does. No amount of planning can guarantee that every conversation will go well. No amount of analysis can remove every risk from a career decision. No amount of preparation can predict every challenge in a relationship. Life remains beautifully and sometimes painfully uncertain. Sophia slowly realized something important. She had been treating uncertainty as a problem to solve instead of a condition to accept. That realization changed the questions she asked herself. Instead of asking, how can I become completely certain before deciding? She began asking, do I have enough information to make a reasonable decision? The difference was subtle, but profound. The first question demanded perfection, the second accepted reality. No longer trapped by impossible standards, Sophia began making decisions with greater confidence. Not because uncertainty disappeared, because she stopped expecting it to. This shift revealed another important truth. Confidence does not come from knowing the future. It comes from trusting yourself to handle whatever the future brings. Those are very different forms of security. The first depends on controlling life. The second depends on strengthening yourself. One constantly chases certainty. The other develops resilience. As Sophia practiced accepting uncertainty, something unexpected happened. Her mind became quieter, not because fewer uncertain situations appeared. Life remained unpredictable. Emails still went unanswered. Plans still changed. Unexpected challenges still arrived. The difference was that she no longer treated every unknown as an emergency. She allowed questions to remain unanswered for a while. She made thoughtful decisions without demanding perfect guarantees. She discovered that uncertainty was not the enemy. The struggle against uncertainty had been. This is one of the most liberating truths in psychology. Peace does not come from eliminating uncertainty. Peace comes from realizing you can live well without complete certainty. You can never predict every outcome. You cannot control every person's opinion. You cannot remove every possibility of failure, but you can develop the courage to keep moving anyway. That courage is what transforms chronic overthinkers into calm decision-makers, because freedom begins the moment you stop requiring life to provide answers it was never designed to give. Yet uncertainty is only one part of the overthinking cycle. There is another force that quietly convinces you every decision, every conversation, and every action must be flawless. And unlike uncertainty, it disguises itself as excellence. If uncertainty fuels overthinking, perfection quietly keeps it alive. Chapter 4. Perfectionism. The hidden fuel. Daniel had notebooks filled with brilliant ideas, business concepts, marketing plans, brand names, financial projections. Every few weeks, he added another page, another improvement, another strategy. He read books, listened to podcasts, watched successful entrepreneurs, and researched competitors until he knew almost everything there was to know about starting a business. There was only one problem. He never actually started. Whenever the idea felt close to becoming real, another thought appeared. The website isn't good enough yet. I should learn more before I launch. Maybe I need a better logo. What if people think it's amateur? What if it fails? So Daniel waited. Weeks became months. Months became years. His dream remained perfectly planned and completely untouched. From the outside, Daniel looked disciplined and thoughtful. Inside, he was trapped. This is one of the greatest illusions of perfectionism. It often disguises itself as responsibility. People admire careful planning, attention to detail, high standards. Those qualities can indeed lead to excellence, but perfectionism is something different. Excellence asks, how can I do this well? Perfectionism asks, how can I avoid making any mistakes? One question encourages growth. The other encourages fear. That distinction changes everything. Many people assume perfectionists are simply ambitious individuals striving for outstanding results. In reality, perfectionism is often driven less by the desire to succeed than by the fear of failing. Psychologists have repeatedly found that perfectionism is closely connected to anxiety, self-criticism, and avoidance. The perfectionist is rarely chasing perfection itself. They're trying to avoid the emotional pain they imagine imperfection will bring. That pain might be embarrassment, rejection, criticism, disappointment, or the frightening possibility that making a mistake somehow says something about who they are. This is where perfectionism becomes deeply connected to self-worth. Healthy self-worth says, I made a mistake. Perfectionism quietly changes the sentence. I am the mistake. Notice the difference. The first separates your actions from your identity. The second fuses them together. When self-worth depends on flawless performance, every decision begins carrying enormous emotional weight. A presentation is no longer just a presentation. It becomes a judgment of your intelligence. A first date becomes a judgment of your value. Launching a business becomes a judgment of whether you deserve success. No wonder overthinking becomes so intense. If every action feels like a verdict on your worth, your brain naturally tries to prevent every possible mistake. Daniel wasn't afraid of hard work. He was afraid of what failure might mean about him. Each unfinished project protected him from that possibility. As long as the business remained an idea, it could still become perfect. Launching it would expose it to reality. Reality includes feedback, competition, unexpected challenges, and imperfection. Ironically, avoiding action protected his self-image while quietly preventing his growth. Perfectionism often creates a painful contradiction. You want success so badly that you become afraid to pursue it. You wait until you're completely ready, completely confident, completely certain. That day rarely arrives, because perfection is not a destination, it is a moving target. The closer you believe you are, the farther away it seems. Another psychological force quietly strengthens this pattern: social comparison. Daniel spent hours studying successful entrepreneurs online. He admired polished websites, inspiring success stories, and impressive achievements. What he rarely saw were the early failures, the awkward first attempts, the mistakes, the years of uncertainty hidden behind today's polished image. He compared his unfinished beginning to someone else's finished chapter. The comparison felt unfair because it was. Social media and modern culture often reward polished outcomes while hiding imperfect processes. We celebrate success. We rarely witness the hundreds of ordinary failures that made success possible. This creates an impossible standard. If everyone else appears confident, successful, and prepared, Your own uncertainty begins feeling like evidence that you don't belong. Yet nearly every accomplished person shares one hidden truth. They began before they felt ready. They learned while moving. They improved because they acted, not because they waited. This is why progress is psychologically more powerful than perfection. Every small action teaches your brain something important. I survived. I learned. I can handle feedback. Each experience weakens fear and strengthens confidence. Confidence is rarely created before action. It is created by action. Daniel eventually reached a turning point. After postponing his business for years, he asked himself a difficult question. What if I'm not waiting for perfection? What if I'm waiting for permission to be imperfect? The question stayed with him. A few weeks later he launched, not because everything was perfect, because it was good enough to begin. His website wasn't flawless. His first product wasn't revolutionary. His marketing wasn't sophisticated. He made mistakes, many of them. Customers pointed out problems. Some ideas failed completely. Others worked far better than expected. But something remarkable happened. Each mistake became information instead of evidence of failure. Each challenge taught him something no amount of planning could have provided. Within months, his business had improved more through real experience than it had during years of endless preparation. Daniel finally understood something that had been invisible for years. Perfection had never been protecting him. It had been imprisoning him. Progress, however, was setting him free. This is one of the greatest psychological shifts you can make. Instead of asking, how can I avoid mistakes? Ask, what can I learn from taking the next step? That question transforms fear into curiosity. It changes action from a test into an experiment. It reminds you that growth is not built through flawless performance. It is built through repeated learning. Perfection creates paralysis because it demands certainty before movement. Progress creates confidence because movement creates experience. Every imperfect conversation, every imperfect decision, every imperfect beginning, each one becomes proof that you are capable of adapting rather than avoiding. Overthinking loses much of its power when you stop treating mistakes as personal failures. Instead, they become part of the process every meaningful life requires. Daniel never became fearless. He became willing, and willingness accomplished what perfection never could. It moved him forward. Understanding why your mind overthinks, why it fears uncertainty, clings to mental loops, and chases impossible standards is a powerful beginning. But awareness alone doesn't change the brain. Recognizing the patterns is only the first step. Now it's time to begin retraining the mind itself. Chapter 5. Rewiring the Thinking Brain. One morning, Emma sat in a coffee shop waiting for a friend who was running late. Normally, those few quiet minutes would have been enough for her mind to begin its familiar routine. She would replay yesterday's conversations, analyze tomorrow's responsibilities, and imagine everything that could go wrong before the day had even properly begun. The first anxious thought arrived exactly as expected. Maybe I sounded unprofessional in yesterday's meeting. Almost immediately, another thought followed. Should I send another email explaining what I meant? For years, Emma would have followed those thoughts wherever they led. She would have mentally rewritten the meeting, imagined her co-workers' opinions, and spent the rest of the morning trying to solve a problem that probably existed only inside her own mind. This time, something different happened. She noticed the thought. Then she simply let it be there. She didn't argue with it. She didn't believe it. She didn't try to force it away. She silently acknowledged it, took a slow breath, and returned her attention to the warmth of the coffee in her hands, the sound of people talking nearby, and the sunlight coming through the window. Within a minute, the thought quietly faded. Another one appeared. She repeated the same process. For the first time in years, Emma experienced something she hadn't realized was possible. She had a thought without becoming trapped inside it. That small moment marked the beginning of a much larger transformation. Many people believe that freedom from overthinking means eliminating unwanted thoughts entirely. But the human brain doesn't work that way. Thoughts appear automatically. Some are helpful, some are meaningless, some are anxious predictions, some are creative ideas. Trying to stop thinking altogether is like trying to stop your heart from beating. The goal is not silence. The goal is freedom. Freedom comes when thoughts stop controlling your attention. One of the most remarkable discoveries in modern psychology and neuroscience is neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong ability to change, reorganize, and strengthen new patterns through repeated experience. For many years, scientists believed the adult brain was largely fixed. Today, we know something very different. Every repeated thought strengthens certain neural pathways. Every repeated behavior makes future behavior more likely. The brain becomes better at whatever it practices. If you spend years rehearsing worry, your brain becomes remarkably efficient at worrying. If you repeatedly return your attention to the present instead of following anxious thoughts, your brain gradually becomes better at doing that too. In other words, overthinking is not just a habit of the mind. Calmness can become one as well. Emma realized she had unknowingly trained her brain for years. Every anxious thought received immediate attention. Every uncertainty became an investigation. Every uncomfortable emotion demanded an answer. Without intending to, she had taught her mind that every thought deserved to be taken seriously. Now she began teaching it something entirely different. This is where attention training becomes so powerful. Your attention is one of your most valuable mental resources. Whatever consistently receives your attention becomes stronger in your experience. Imagine your attention as a flashlight in a dark room. The flashlight cannot illuminate everything at once. Wherever you point it becomes your reality. If you continually shine that light on fear, mistakes, and imagined disasters, those experiences begin dominating your inner world. If you intentionally redirect it toward the present moment, meaningful action, and reality rather than imagination, your experience gradually changes. Notice what changes first, not your thoughts, your relationship with them. Another valuable psychological tool is cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing doesn't ask you to pretend everything is positive. Instead, it encourages you to question whether your first interpretation is the only possible one. Imagine receiving a short email from your manager that simply says, "Can we talk tomorrow?" An overthinking mind may immediately conclude, "I'm in trouble. They're disappointed in me. I'm about to lose my job." Cognitive reframing asks a gentler question. What are some other possible explanations? Perhaps your manager wants your opinion. Perhaps there's a new opportunity. Perhaps it's simply a routine conversation. The goal isn't blind optimism, it's balanced thinking. Emma began practicing this every day. Whenever her mind generated frightening conclusions, she reminded herself that thoughts are interpretations, not facts. She became curious instead of convinced. That curiosity weakened the emotional power of many anxious predictions. She also noticed something surprising. Thoughts behaved much like clouds crossing the sky. The more she chased them, the longer they stayed. The more she allowed them to pass without resistance, the more naturally they disappeared. This realization changed her understanding of control. For years, she believed control meant controlling her thoughts. Now she understood that real control meant choosing where to place her attention. That distinction changed everything. Gradually, moments of peace became more frequent, not because anxious thoughts had vanished, because they no longer dictated every action. Emma wasn't becoming someone with a perfect mind. She was becoming someone who trusted herself more than every passing thought. This is one of the most liberating truths you'll ever learn. A thought is an event. Not an instruction, not a prediction, not a command. It is simply something the mind produces. Some thoughts deserve action. Many deserve nothing more than acknowledgement. The ability to recognize that difference is the beginning of psychological freedom. Each time you observe instead of react, you strengthen a new pathway in your brain. Each time you return your attention to the present, you teach your mind that uncertainty does not require endless analysis. Each time you question an anxious interpretation, you weaken the habits that once kept you trapped. Change rarely happens through one dramatic breakthrough. It happens through thousands of small moments when you quietly choose a different response. Those moments gradually become your new normal, because your brain is always learning. The question is not whether it will change. The question is what you are teaching it every day. Awareness begins the process. Practice strengthens it, but awareness alone is never enough. The habits you repeat each day ultimately determine whether lasting change becomes part of who you are. Chapter 6. Building Habits that Quiet the Mind. Ryan used to believe that one day he would simply stop overthinking. He imagined waking up after reading the right book, hearing the perfect piece of advice, or experiencing a breakthrough that would finally silence the endless noise in his head. That day never came. Some evenings were better than others, but the familiar pattern always returned. As the day slowed down, his thoughts sped up. The lights went off, the room became quiet, and his mind began searching for unfinished conversations, future problems, and questions without answers. For years, Ryan treated overthinking like an emergency that required a dramatic solution. What he eventually discovered was far less exciting, but far more effective. The mind is changed by routines, not revelations. Human beings naturally love dramatic transformations. We enjoy stories about overnight success, life-changing moments, and instant breakthroughs. Yet psychology consistently shows that lasting change is usually much quieter. It happens through small behaviors repeated so consistently that they begin shaping the brain itself. This is because much of daily life is driven by habits rather than conscious decisions. From the moment you wake up, countless actions happen almost automatically. You brush your teeth, check your phone, prepare breakfast, drive familiar routes, and respond to situations with surprisingly little conscious effort. Your brain values habits because they conserve energy. Once a behavior becomes familiar, it requires much less mental effort to repeat. Unfortunately, overthinking can become a habit in exactly the same way. Many people assume anxious thinking begins with a difficult thought. Often, it begins much earlier, with a cue. Psychologists describe this process as the habit loop, which consists of three parts: a cue, a routine, a reward. The cue is the trigger. The routine is the behavior that follows. The reward is the feeling your brain receives afterward, encouraging the behavior to happen again. Consider Ryan's evenings. The cue was simple: silence. The moment distractions disappeared and he climbed into bed, his brain recognized a familiar pattern. The routine followed almost immediately: replay the interview, review conversations, imagine tomorrow's problems, analyze every possibility. The reward was surprisingly subtle. Although overthinking felt exhausting, it also created the temporary illusion of preparation. His brain mistakenly believed, if I think long enough, I'll be safer tomorrow. That small feeling of control became enough to reinforce the habit. The next evening, the loop repeated. Breaking a habit rarely begins by fighting the routine directly. It begins by recognizing the cue. Ryan started paying attention to the moments when his thoughts became loudest. It wasn't random. The pattern was remarkably predictable. Late evening, dim lights, his phone beside the bed, no external distractions. Once he recognized those cues, he stopped expecting his mind to behave differently without changing the environment around it. Instead of scrolling through social media until the moment he tried to sleep, he created a different evening rhythm. An hour before bed, he placed his phone in another room. He dimmed the lights. He wrote down unfinished tasks for the next day, so his brain no longer felt responsible for remembering everything overnight. Then he spent a few quiet minutes reading something calming instead of consuming endless information online. None of these habits seemed powerful on their own. That was precisely the point. The brain rarely changes because of one extraordinary action. It changes because of ordinary actions repeated consistently. The first few nights felt strange. His thoughts still appeared. Some evenings were just as restless as before. For a moment, Ryan wondered whether anything was changing at all. But habits don't announce themselves. They grow quietly. Week after week, his evenings became less chaotic. His mind gradually stopped associating bedtime with endless mental investigation. The cue remained the same. The routine had changed. Psychologists often summarize this process as cue, routine, reward. The cue doesn't have to disappear. The reward doesn't have to disappear. Only the routine needs to change. Instead of responding to quiet moments with rumination, Ryan began responding with calming rituals that signaled safety rather than danger. Eventually, his brain started expecting peace instead of analysis. Another powerful shift occurred when Ryan stopped focusing exclusively on behavior and began focusing on identity. Earlier in this audiobook, we explored how identity shapes long-term change. The same principle applies here. If your identity is, "I'm someone who always overthinks," every anxious evening feels like confirmation. If your identity becomes, "I'm someone who knows how to calm my mind," each healthy habit reinforces that belief. These are known as identity habits. The purpose of a habit is not simply to complete a task. Its deeper purpose is to strengthen the person you believe yourself to be. Ryan stopped measuring success by whether he had anxious thoughts. He measured success by whether he practiced his evening routine. That subtle shift reduced pressure dramatically. Some nights, his mind remained busy. He followed the routine anyway. Other nights, he felt calm almost immediately. He followed the routine anyway. The habit became more important than the outcome. Ironically, that's when the outcomes began improving. This is one of the quietest but most profound truths about lasting change. Consistency almost always outperforms intensity. One perfect evening cannot undo years of mental conditioning. One calm meditation session cannot permanently retrain the brain. But small daily practices repeated over months gradually become stronger than old habits. Like water slowly shaping stone, consistent action transforms the mind through patience rather than force. Ryan no longer searched for magical solutions. He trusted ordinary routines. He accepted that some days would feel easier than others. He understood that progress was measured not by perfection, but by repetition. Months later, when difficult thoughts appeared before bed, something had changed. His first instinct was no longer to chase them. It was to return to the habits that grounded him. Those habits had become part of who he was. And because they reflected his identity, maintaining them required less effort than creating them had in the beginning. Your mind becomes quieter, not because you win one great battle against overthinking. It becomes quieter because you gently teach it, day after day, that safety no longer requires endless analysis. Every repeated habit becomes another lesson for the brain. Every calm response weakens an old pattern. Every consistent practice strengthens a new one. That is how lasting change is built. Not through intensity, through consistency. Yet even the strongest habits have limits. There will still be moments when powerful emotions appear unexpectedly and seem to overwhelm everything you've practiced. Because even with better habits, emotions can still hijack your thinking. Chapter 7. Learning to trust yourself again. Imagine standing at the edge of a swimming pool. You know how to swim, you've practiced before, you've done it many times, yet instead of jumping in, you spend 20 minutes wondering whether the water is too cold, whether you've forgotten the proper technique, whether you should wait until someone else arrives, or whether tomorrow might somehow be a better day. Eventually you leave without ever entering the water. This is what overthinking often does to everyday life. It convinces you that one more thought, one more plan, or one more guarantee is all you need before taking action. The promise sounds reasonable. The result is usually delay. Behind that delay lies a deeper problem. It isn't simply uncertainty, it's the gradual loss of trust in yourself. Many chronic overthinkers don't struggle because they lack intelligence. They struggle because they no longer believe they can handle making the wrong decision. Every choice begins to feel like a test. Every mistake feels permanent. Every uncertain situation becomes evidence that they should think longer before acting. Over time, the mind reaches a painful conclusion. I can't trust myself. That belief quietly shapes every decision that follows. Psychologists describe the opposite experience as self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that you are capable of handling challenges, learning from mistakes, and adapting when life doesn't go according to plan. Notice what self-efficacy is not. It is not believing you'll always succeed. It is believing you'll find a way forward even when you don't. That distinction changes everything. People with strong self-efficacy still experience uncertainty. They still make mistakes. They still feel nervous before important decisions. The difference is that uncertainty no longer convinces them to stop moving. They trust themselves to adjust as they go. Daniel had spent years believing he needed complete confidence before launching his business. Earlier, you saw how perfectionism kept him trapped in endless preparation. Even after recognizing that pattern, another challenge remained. He still doubted himself. Every time he prepared to launch, familiar questions appeared. What if customers don't like it? What if I fail publicly? What if everyone realizes I'm not good enough? The questions weren't really about the business. They were about Daniel. Deep down, he believed one unsuccessful attempt would define him. One evening, after postponing the launch once again, he noticed something. He had spent months trying to predict every possible outcome. Yet none of that thinking had increased his confidence. If anything, it had made him more uncertain. For the first time, he asked himself a different question. What if confidence isn't something I find before I begin? What if it's something I earn by beginning? The question stayed with him. The next morning, Daniel launched. Not because fear had disappeared, not because certainty had finally arrived. He launched because he realized waiting for perfect confidence was another form of overthinking. His first week wasn't extraordinary. Some people ignored his work. A few offered constructive criticism. One customer misunderstood what he was offering. The experience was imperfect. It was also deeply freeing. Daniel survived. More importantly, he learned. Every challenge he encountered taught him something no amount of planning ever could. Each small success became evidence. Each solved problem strengthened his confidence. Each mistake proved that he was capable of recovering. This is how decision confidence is built. Many people believe confidence comes from making perfect decisions. In reality, confidence grows from seeing yourself handle imperfect outcomes. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. You don't become confident by reading about balance. You become confident by wobbling, adjusting, falling, and eventually discovering that you can recover. Life works the same way. Confidence is the memory of previous recoveries. The more experiences you have navigating uncertainty, the more your brain begins believing, whatever happens, I'll figure it out. That belief is incredibly powerful. It shifts your attention away from controlling every outcome and toward trusting your ability to respond. Another important part of this transformation involves internal validation. Overthinkers often depend heavily on external reassurance. They ask everyone for advice. They seek repeated confirmation that they're making the right choice. They worry excessively about criticism because other people's opinions become the measure of their own worth. External guidance can be valuable, but when every important decision depends on someone else's approval, your confidence never fully belongs to you. Daniel gradually learned to listen differently. He welcomed feedback. He considered advice. But he stopped expecting others to remove every doubt before he acted. Instead, he asked himself, does this decision align with my values, my goals, and the information I have right now? If the answer was yes, he moved forward. He accepted that no decision came with absolute guarantees. Ironically, the less he searched for universal approval, the calmer his mind became. He no longer viewed criticism as proof that he had failed. He viewed it as information that could help him improve. That shift restored something overthinking had quietly stolen. Trust. Not trust that life would always go according to plan. Trust that he could meet life as it unfolded. This is one of the greatest transformations any chronic overthinker can experience. You stop asking, what if I choose wrong? And begin asking, if things don't go as planned, do I trust myself to adapt? The answer doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be growing. Because every decision you make becomes another opportunity to strengthen that trust. Every action reminds your brain that uncertainty is survivable. Every challenge teaches resilience. Every recovery becomes evidence that you are far more capable than your anxious mind often believes. Daniel didn't become fearless. He became self-reliant. That quiet confidence influenced every area of his life. He spoke with greater clarity. He made decisions more calmly. He stopped measuring success by the absence of mistakes and started measuring it by his willingness to keep moving. Confidence had finally arrived, not because certainty had appeared, because action had taught him what overthinking never could. You are stronger than your doubts suggest, and the more you trust yourself, the less your mind feels compelled to predict every possible future. Because confidence always follows action, it never waits for certainty. Once you begin trusting yourself again, another remarkable transformation becomes possible. You stop trying to control every thought and start discovering the freedom that comes from simply letting them pass. Chapter 8. Escaping the need for control. Imagine holding a handful of sand. At first, you hold it gently. Most of it remains in your hand. Then imagine becoming afraid that the sand might slip away. Instinctively, you squeeze your fist tighter. The harder you grip, the faster the sand escapes through your fingers. The very effort to keep everything under control becomes the reason you lose it. The mind often works the same way. The more desperately we try to control every outcome, every emotion, and every uncertain future, the more anxious and exhausted we become. This is one of the great paradoxes of overthinking. People rarely overthink because they enjoy worrying. They overthink because they are trying to protect themselves. If they can predict every possibility, maybe they won't be surprised. If they can prepare for every outcome, maybe they won't get hurt. If they can control every detail, maybe life will finally feel safe. But life has never promised perfect certainty, and the search for complete control quietly becomes its own prison. Sophia had spent years trying to control futures that hadn't happened yet. Before every important meeting, she mentally rehearsed dozens of conversations. Before every vacation, she imagined everything that could go wrong. Before making even small decisions, she tried to predict every possible consequence. She believed this constant preparation made her responsible. In reality, it made her exhausted. One afternoon, while waiting for the results of a medical checkup, her mind immediately began creating frightening possibilities. She imagined serious illnesses, difficult conversations, life-changing consequences. For 2 days, she lived inside futures that existed only in her imagination. When the results finally arrived, everything was normal. The relief was overwhelming, but another realization quickly followed. She had suffered intensely over something that had never happened. The danger had not been the medical test. It had been her struggle to control what she could not know. That experience became a turning point. Sophia began asking herself a simple question whenever anxiety appeared. Is this something I can influence, or something I'm only trying to control? The distinction changed her life. There are many things you can influence. You can prepare, you can communicate honestly, you can care for your health, you can learn new skills, you can make thoughtful decisions, but there are countless things you cannot control. Other people's opinions, unexpected events, economic changes, the past, the future. Trying to control these realities does not make them more predictable. It simply consumes your energy. This is where the psychology of acceptance becomes so powerful. Acceptance is often misunderstood. Many people believe acceptance means giving up or becoming passive. It does not. Acceptance means seeing reality as it is before deciding how to respond. It is the willingness to stop arguing with facts that cannot be changed. Imagine standing in the rain. You may dislike the weather. You may wish the sky were clear, but arguing with the rain does not make it stop. Once you accept that it is raining, you can choose a response. Open an umbrella, wear a coat, wait until the storm passes. Acceptance creates clarity. Resistance creates suffering. Another important concept is emotional regulation. Earlier in this audiobook, you learned that emotional regulation is not about suppressing feelings. It is about experiencing emotions without allowing them to control every decision. The same principle applies here. Sophia still felt anxious. She still experienced uncertainty. The difference was that she stopped treating those emotions as emergencies requiring immediate solutions. Instead of chasing every anxious thought, she noticed it, she named it. She allowed it to exist without assuming it represented reality. That small pause became incredibly powerful, because emotions, like thoughts, naturally rise and fall when we stop fighting them. One of the deepest forms of acceptance is known as radical acceptance. Radical acceptance means fully acknowledging reality, even when you dislike it. It means saying, this situation is difficult, I don't have to like it, but this is where I am. Notice how different that feels from constant resistance. Resistance asks, why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. I can't handle this. Acceptance says, this is happening. Now, what is the wisest response? Those two mindsets produce completely different emotional experiences. Sophia began practicing this in everyday life. When plans changed unexpectedly, she stopped replaying how things should have unfolded. When people misunderstood her, she explained herself if necessary and then released the need to control their final opinion. When uncertainty appeared, she reminded herself that discomfort was not evidence of danger. It was evidence that she was living a real life, one that could never be perfectly predicted. Gradually, her mind became quieter, not because life became easier, because she stopped demanding that life become predictable before allowing herself to feel peaceful. This is one of the greatest freedoms available to any human being. You realize that peace is not created by controlling everything around you. It is created by changing your relationship with what you cannot control. The energy once spent fighting uncertainty becomes available for living. Relationships become more genuine because you stop rehearsing every conversation. Decisions become easier because you stop demanding perfect guarantees. Sleep becomes deeper because your mind no longer feels responsible for solving tomorrow before today has ended. Control begins to loosen its grip. Life begins to expand. Sophia eventually noticed something remarkable. The less she tried to control every possible future, the more present she became in the one she was actually living. She laughed more easily. She listened more fully. She appreciated ordinary moments without constantly worrying about what might happen next. The future had not become certain. She had simply stopped believing certainty was required for peace. That may be the greatest lesson of all. You do not need to control every thought. You do not need to eliminate every fear. You do not need to predict every tomorrow. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is loosen your grip, breathe deeply, and trust yourself to meet life as it comes. Control less, live more. By now, you've begun changing the way you respond to your thoughts, emotions, and uncertainty. But the deepest transformation is still ahead, because lasting freedom doesn't come only from changing how you think. It comes from changing who you believe yourself to be. Chapter 9. Becoming someone who thinks clearly. Imagine meeting someone who remains calm during situations that make everyone else anxious. A difficult conversation begins, yet they listen before responding. Unexpected news arrives, yet they avoid rushing to conclusions. A problem appears, yet instead of spiraling into endless possibilities, they pause, gather the facts, and decide what to do next. At first glance, it may seem as though they simply have a calmer personality, but often something much deeper is happening. They have built an identity that supports clear thinking. Throughout this audiobook, you've learned techniques for understanding your thoughts, interrupting mental loops, accepting uncertainty, and building healthier habits. All of those practices are valuable, yet they become truly lasting only when they stop feeling like techniques and begin feeling like part of who you are. This is where lasting transformation occurs. Psychologists describe this process through identity-based habits. The habits you repeat are not only things you do, they are votes for the kind of person you believe yourself to be. Every time you pause before reacting, you reinforce the identity of someone who responds thoughtfully. Every time you accept uncertainty without chasing endless reassurance, you strengthen the identity of someone who trusts themselves. Every time you choose presence instead of rumination, you become a little more like the person you wish to be. Identity quietly shapes attention. If you believe, "I'm an anxious person," your mind naturally searches for evidence that confirms it. You notice every worried thought, every moment of hesitation, every uncomfortable feeling. But if your identity becomes, "I'm someone who thinks clearly, even when life feels uncertain," your attention begins changing. Instead of asking, "Why am I so anxious?" you begin asking, "What's actually happening right now?" The questions themselves become calmer, and calmer questions often produce calmer answers. Emma experienced this transformation slowly. Months earlier, she had spent countless evenings replaying conversations, searching for hidden mistakes, and imagining other people's opinions. Now something was different. The thoughts still appeared occasionally, but they no longer controlled her. One afternoon, during a meeting at work, a colleague criticized part of her presentation. Months earlier, that single comment would have occupied her mind for days. She would have replayed every sentence, questioned her abilities, and searched for reassurance from everyone around her. This time, she listened. She thanked her colleague for the feedback. She made a few notes. Then she returned her attention to the discussion. The conversation ended. So did her mental replay. Later that week, a friend smiled and said, "You've changed." Emma looked surprised. "You don't react the way you used to," her friend continued. "You seem calmer, like you don't need to solve every problem the moment it appears." Emma hadn't noticed the change herself. It had happened so gradually that it simply felt normal. That is often how real transformation works. It rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It grows quietly until the new way of living feels more familiar than the old one. This process reflects another important psychological principle: behavioral consistency. Human beings naturally prefer acting in ways that match their identity. Once Emma genuinely began seeing herself as someone who valued clarity rather than certainty, many old habits no longer felt natural. She didn't force herself to stop overthinking. She no longer believed overthinking was who she was. That distinction changed everything. Notice the shift. She wasn't trying to become perfect. She wasn't trying to eliminate every anxious thought. She was becoming someone who understood that thoughts deserve observation before belief. That identity influenced hundreds of small decisions. She paused before responding to stressful emails. She allowed silence during conversations without assuming something was wrong. She accepted not knowing every answer immediately. Each action reinforced the person she was becoming. The remarkable thing about identity is that it simplifies decision-making. When you know who you are, many choices become obvious. Someone who identifies as physically healthy naturally chooses behaviors that support health. Someone who identifies as financially responsible naturally protects their future. Someone who identifies as a clear thinker naturally returns to reality instead of becoming lost in imagined catastrophes. Identity reduces internal conflict. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What would the person I'm becoming do?" That question rarely produces perfect answers. It produces consistent ones. Over time, consistency becomes confidence, confidence becomes peace, and peace creates space for wisdom. Emma eventually realized that clarity had never come from controlling every thought. It came from trusting herself enough not to chase every thought. She no longer measured success by the absence of anxiety. She measured it by the presence of awareness. She wasn't waiting for life to become certain. She was learning to live well without certainty. That may be the greatest identity shift of all. Become the kind of person who values clarity more than certainty. Because clarity helps you move forward. Certainty often keeps you standing still, and once your thinking becomes clearer, something remarkable begins happening. The decisions you make, and ultimately the life you create, begin changing naturally as well. Chapter 10. Making Decisions Without Regret. Imagine standing in front of a restaurant menu with hundreds of options. At first, having so many choices feels exciting. Then, something unexpected happens. The more possibilities you consider, the harder it becomes to choose. You compare every meal, imagine whether another option might be better, and begin worrying that the moment you make one choice, you'll miss out on something even better. By the time you finally decide, you're no longer enjoying the experience. You're wondering whether you chose correctly. Life often feels exactly the same. Every decision closes one door while opening another. Accept one job and you cannot accept another. Move to one city and you leave another behind. Choose one relationship, one opportunity or one direction, and countless alternatives disappear. For many people, this reality is uncomfortable. For chronic overthinkers, it can feel almost unbearable. The problem is rarely the decision itself. The problem is believing there must be one perfect choice hidden somewhere among the possibilities. Ryan understood this struggle all too well. Months earlier, he had become trapped replaying a failed interview. Now his challenge looked different. He had received 2 job offers. One offered higher pay. The other promised greater learning opportunities. Both had advantages. Both carried risks. Instead of feeling grateful, Ryan became mentally exhausted. He created comparison charts, asked friends for advice, read company reviews, imagined his future under every possible scenario. Days passed. His confidence shrank with every new analysis. Eventually, he realized something important. The more information he gathered, the less certain he became. This is one of the hidden costs of excessive thinking. Psychologists describe a phenomenon known as decision fatigue. Every decision consumes mental energy. From the moment you wake up, Your brain is constantly choosing what to wear, what to eat, how to respond to messages, and how to prioritize your day. As that mental energy decreases, decision-making often becomes slower, more emotional, or more avoidant. Overthinkers unknowingly accelerate this fatigue. Instead of making one thoughtful decision, they make the same decision hundreds of times inside their minds. Each replay drains attention. Each imagined scenario consumes energy. By the time action is finally required, they often feel mentally exhausted before anything has actually happened. Another fascinating psychological distinction helps explain why some people become trapped in endless analysis. Researchers describe two broad approaches to decision-making. Maximizers search endlessly for the absolute best option. Satisficers search for an option that meets their important values and then confidently move forward. At first glance, maximizing seems wiser. Why wouldn't you want the very best? The difficulty is that perfection rarely exists. The maximizer continues searching because there is always another article to read, another opinion to hear, another possibility to consider. Even after making a decision, they often wonder whether another choice would have been better. The satisficer approaches life differently. They identify what matters most. They gather reasonable information, then they choose. Not because they know the future, because they understand that no amount of analysis can eliminate uncertainty. Ryan realized he had spent most of his life behaving like a maximizer. Every decision carried the impossible burden of needing to be perfect, but the longer he reflected, the more he understood something deeper. His goal was not to make flawless decisions. His goal was to build a meaningful life. Those are not always the same thing. He returned to a question that had quietly guided many of the changes throughout this audiobook. Which choice aligns most closely with my values? Not which choice guarantees success. Not which choice eliminates all regret. Simply, which choice reflects the life I want to create? The answer became clearer. He accepted the position that offered greater growth rather than immediate comfort. Could it turn out to be the wrong decision? Possibly. But he trusted himself enough to adapt if necessary. That trust mattered more than certainty. Another concept helped Ryan move forward. Opportunity cost. Every choice carries an opportunity cost. When you say yes to one path, you naturally say no to another. Many overthinkers treat this as evidence that they should delay making decisions. In reality, refusing to choose also has an opportunity cost. Time passes, experiences are missed, growth is postponed. Waiting is not a neutral decision, it is a decision with consequences of its own. Ryan stopped measuring his choices by whether they produced immediate comfort. He measured them by whether they reflected thoughtful values. Some decisions worked beautifully, others required adjustment. Both helped him grow. This is the quiet truth about regret. Most lasting regret does not come from making imperfect decisions. It comes from allowing fear to prevent decisions altogether. A life spent avoiding mistakes often becomes a life filled with missed opportunities. The people who seem most confident are not those who always choose correctly. They are those who understand that no single decision determines an entire life. They remain flexible, they learn, they adapt, they trust themselves enough to keep moving. That trust transforms decision-making from a search for certainty into an expression of character. Ryan eventually noticed something remarkable. He no longer spent weeks replaying every choice. He reflected, he learned, then he continued living. The mental energy once consumed by endless analysis became available for creating new experiences instead. His decisions became calmer because they were rooted in values rather than fear. He accepted that every meaningful life includes imperfect choices. No amount of thinking could change that. But wise thinking could help him choose with intention. Good decisions rarely come from endless analysis. They come from knowing what matters most and acting accordingly, because values provide direction. Analysis alone often provides only delay. By now, your relationship with your thoughts has changed dramatically. You've learned to question them instead of automatically believing them. You've learned to act despite uncertainty. You've learned to choose progress over perfection, but one final obstacle still remains. Eventually, your greatest challenge is no longer your thoughts themselves. It is the identity you've spent years believing about the person who thinks them. Chapter 11. The Freedom of Letting Go. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every day. At first, you barely notice its weight. You assume the strain on your shoulders is simply part of life. But as the years pass, every step becomes a little more difficult. Climbing hills requires more effort. Standing still feels exhausting. You adapt so completely that you forget what it feels like to walk without the burden. Then one day, someone asks a simple question. What if you don't have to carry it anymore? Many people approach overthinking in exactly this way. They carry old mistakes, old conversations, old disappointments, old versions of themselves. They replay them so often that the weight begins to feel normal. Letting go sounds risky because the mind quietly believes that holding on serves a purpose. If I keep thinking about what happened, maybe I won't make the same mistake again. If I keep replaying that conversation, maybe I'll finally understand it. If I don't let it go, then at least I'm being responsible. But what if holding on is no longer protecting you? What if it is only preventing you from moving forward? Daniel understood this more deeply than he ever expected. For years, he carried regret about opportunities he never pursued. He thought about the business he delayed, the friendships he allowed to fade, the chances he ignored because fear convinced him he wasn't ready. Even after launching his business and beginning to trust himself again, those memories occasionally returned. His mind whispered, "You wasted so much time. Imagine where you'd be if you'd started earlier." At first, Daniel argued with those thoughts. He tried to prove them wrong. He reminded himself of everything he had accomplished, yet the more he fought them, the more persistent they became. Eventually, he realized something surprising. He didn't need to win an argument with the past. He needed to stop living inside it. This realization introduced him to a powerful psychological skill: cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is the ability to shift perspectives instead of becoming trapped in one rigid interpretation. A rigid mind says, "Because I made mistakes, I failed." A flexible mind says, "Because I made mistakes, I learned." A rigid mind asks, "Why didn't I know better?" A flexible mind asks, "What wisdom do I have now that I didn't have then?" Notice what changes. The facts remain exactly the same. Only the meaning changes. Daniel couldn't erase the years he had spent overthinking. He couldn't return to the past and launch his business earlier, but he could choose the story he told himself about those years. Instead of seeing them as proof that he had fallen behind, he began seeing them as the experiences that eventually taught him how to move forward. That shift didn't erase regret overnight, but it slowly transformed regret into compassion. He began treating his younger self with the same understanding he would offer a close friend. After all, that younger version of Daniel hadn't been lazy. He hadn't been weak. He had been afraid. And like so many people, he believed fear was something to obey instead of something to understand. Another important part of letting go involves emotional attachment. We often imagine attachment as something connected only to people or possessions, but we also become attached to identities, stories, and emotional patterns. Some people become attached to being the one who was treated unfairly. Others become attached to being the perfectionist, or the anxious one, or the person who always overthinks. These identities feel familiar, even when they cause pain. Why? Because the familiar often feels safer than the unknown. Letting go of those identities can feel like losing a part of yourself. But what you're really losing is the version of yourself that no longer serves you. That is not loss. It is growth. Daniel gradually stopped asking, "Why did this happen?" He started asking, "Who do I want to become now?" The past still existed. Its grip on him did not. This is where acceptance becomes more than an idea. Acceptance is not agreeing that painful experiences were fair. It is recognizing that fighting reality forever only extends suffering. Acceptance says, "This happened. I cannot change it, but I can choose what happens next." Those words carry extraordinary freedom because they shift your attention away from what has already ended and toward what is still possible. Daniel noticed something remarkable as he practiced this mindset. The energy he once spent replaying old regrets became available for building new experiences. His business continued growing. His relationships became stronger because he was more present. He laughed more often. He worried less about yesterday, not because the past had disappeared, because he had finally stopped carrying it everywhere he went. This may be the quietest transformation in the entire journey. Overthinking teaches you to cling, to replay, to hold tighter. Healing teaches you something different. That peace is rarely found by holding on more firmly. It is found by loosening your grip, by allowing life to move, by trusting that your future deserves more attention than your past. Holding on often feels safe. Letting go feels uncertain, but uncertainty is where freedom begins, because every burden you release creates space for something new. New experiences, new relationships, new confidence, a new identity. Peace does not come from controlling every memory or solving every unanswered question. It comes from deciding that your life is too valuable to remain trapped inside chapters that have already ended. And once you discover the freedom of letting go, one final transformation becomes possible. The goal is no longer simply to think less, it is to live more. Chapter 12. A quiet mind, a meaningful life. Think back to where this journey began, not with a solution, not with a breakthrough, but with a restless mind, a mind that replayed conversations long after they had ended, a mind that searched endlessly for certainty in an uncertain world, a mind that believed every thought deserved attention and every feeling demanded an answer. Perhaps at the beginning of this audiobook, that mind felt familiar. Perhaps it still does from time to time. The difference is that now you understand something you may not have understood before. A peaceful mind is not a mind without thoughts. It is a mind that knows which thoughts are worth following. That distinction changes everything. Throughout this journey, you've explored the psychology of overthinking from many different angles. You discovered how the brain evolved to detect threats, why unfinished experiences keep returning, why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable, and how perfectionism quietly disguises itself as responsibility. You learned that habits reshape the brain, self-trust grows through action, acceptance creates freedom, and identity ultimately determines the direction of your thinking. Each lesson pointed toward one simple truth. Your mind was never the enemy. It was trying to protect you using strategies that no longer served your life. Once you understood that, the relationship began to change. Instead of fighting your thoughts, you learned to observe them. Instead of demanding certainty, you learned to tolerate uncertainty. Instead of chasing control, you learned to practice acceptance. That is the beginning of psychological freedom. True freedom is not having complete control over your mind. It is no longer needing complete control in order to live well. This is where psychological flexibility becomes one of the greatest strengths you can develop. A flexible mind does not cling to one rigid story. It adapts, it learns, it lets go. When circumstances change, it adjusts instead of breaking. When difficult emotions appear, it makes room for them without allowing them to take over. When uncertainty arrives, it continues moving forward with courage rather than waiting for perfect reassurance. That flexibility creates resilience, not because life becomes easier, but because you become better equipped to meet life as it is. As you think about the people you've met throughout this audiobook, notice what changed in each of them. Emma no longer spent every evening trapped inside conversations that had already ended. She became someone who paused before reacting, trusted her perspective, and returned her attention to the present instead of becoming lost in imagined judgments. Her relationships deepened because she was finally listening to people instead of listening only to her fears. Ryan stopped believing that every unanswered question required endless analysis. He built simple habits that quieted his mind, accepted that good decisions are rarely perfect, and discovered that confidence grows through action rather than endless preparation. The mental energy he once spent worrying became available for creating a richer life. Sophia learned to release the exhausting need to control every possible future. She accepted that uncertainty was not a flaw in life, but one of its defining characteristics. Instead of living inside imagined tomorrows, she became fully present in today's conversations, experiences, and opportunities. Daniel stopped allowing regret and perfectionism to define his future. He trusted himself enough to begin before he felt completely ready. He let go of old identities that kept him trapped and discovered that progress, not perfection, creates a meaningful life. Although their stories were different, their transformation shared the same foundation. Life did not suddenly become predictable. Problems did not disappear. Uncertainty remained. What changed was the way they related to their own minds. That may be the most important lesson of all. A meaningful life is not created by eliminating every difficult thought. It is created by refusing to let those thoughts become the author of your story. This is where purpose becomes essential. When your life is guided by something meaningful, whether it is love, growth, service, creativity, family, or contribution, your thoughts gradually take their proper place. They become advisors, not rulers. Your mind becomes a remarkable tool for learning, solving problems, imagining possibilities, and creating a better future. But it is no longer your master. You choose where your attention goes. You choose which thoughts deserve action. You choose the values that shape your decisions. That is what it means to reclaim your life. Because peace is not found by waiting for silence. It is found by living intentionally, even when the mind occasionally grows noisy. The journey began with endless mental loops, constant self-doubt, and the exhausting search for certainty. It ends somewhere far more powerful, with a life guided by clarity instead of fear, and that is a life worth building every single day. As you reach the end of this audiobook, take a moment to notice something that may have changed. Perhaps your mind is still producing questions. Perhaps uncertainty still exists. Perhaps difficult thoughts still appear from time to time. That was never the problem. The problem was believing that every thought deserved your attention, every fear required an answer, and every uncertain future had to be solved before you could begin living. Throughout this journey, you've discovered something far more powerful. Overthinking is not your personality. It is not your destiny. It is not proof that you are broken, weak, or incapable of change. It is a learned psychological pattern, a habit your brain developed while trying to protect you. And like any learned pattern, it can be understood, challenged, and gradually replaced. You learned why your brain constantly searches for danger, why mental loops become so difficult to escape, why uncertainty feels threatening, and how perfectionism quietly disguises itself as responsibility. More importantly, you discovered that lasting freedom doesn't come from controlling every thought. It comes from changing your relationship with those thoughts. Emma, Ryan, Sophia, and Daniel didn't transform because life suddenly became easier. They still faced uncertainty, difficult decisions, unexpected setbacks, and moments of self-doubt. The difference was that they no longer allowed fear to become the author of their lives. They learned to pause instead of panic, to observe instead of react, to trust instead of endlessly analyze, and to move forward even when certainty never arrived. That same transformation is available to you. You don't need a perfectly quiet mind to live a meaningful life. You don't need complete confidence before taking the next step. You don't need every answer before making an important decision. Peace is not something you discover once and keep forever. It is something you cultivate through daily practice. Each time you return your attention to the present moment, each time you release the need to control the uncontrollable, each time you choose progress over perfection, each time you trust yourself enough to take one small step forward. Those moments quietly reshape the way you think and ultimately the way you live. As you leave this audiobook, remember one simple truth. Your mind is an extraordinary tool. Use it to learn. Use it to create. Use it to solve meaningful problems. But never allow it to convince you that endless thinking is the same as living. The life you've been waiting to experience isn't waiting on the other side of perfect certainty. It's waiting on the other side of courageous action. Trust yourself. Welcome uncertainty as a natural part of growth. Move forward with curiosity instead of fear. And remember that a peaceful life is not built by eliminating every anxious thought. It is built by becoming the kind of person who no longer lets those thoughts decide the direction of your future. That is how you break the cycle. That is how you reclaim your mind. And that is how you reclaim your life.